Thank you so much. My name is Sophie Otiende. I define myself as a feminist, a teacher, and a poet. I love poetry so much. So I'm here to speak to you mainly about movement building, because I think there's a lot we say in this space, and there's been a lot of questions around this issue. And for me, having been working on this issue for the past maybe now 12 years, everyone agrees that there isn't momentum around it. Everyone has many solutions, and many of those solutions are practical, but the reality is that any oppression that has ever existed in this world has only been addressed when there's been a movement to address it. And we do not have a movement. I have said that in many spaces, and people have taken it personally. Some people have been offended. We've been working all these years. Don't we have a movement? And the truth is we don't. We have a sector full of expertise, full of knowledge, full of information, but it's not information that inspires people to act. It does not inspire people to act. And the only way you inspire people to act is by centering the people impacted by it, allowing them to lead, allowing them to show you the way. I'm in multiple rooms like this all over the world on this issue, and consistently, I'm the only person who has lived experience in that room. And consistently, my heart is broken. I call myself a jaded activist. I'm a very, very jaded activist, but I'm a prisoner of hope. So I hope that things will change. I wanted to start with a poem from one of my favorite poets, Audre Lorde, and it's called A Litany for Survival. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love indoors, coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at once before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures. Like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who are imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk. For by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us with this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. That's the position of most people with lived experience in this space. It's this knowledge that you are never meant to survive. Therefore, you show up. You show up even when it's hopeless. You show up even when you know people are not going to listen to you, which in many cases, unfortunately in this space, is many times that people do not listen. I say this as one of the most privileged survivors out there. I come, despite suffering abuse, my family was supportive. I have recovered. I have a strong network of people that support me. I'm fully healed. I've gone to school. I'm an expert. Yet in this space, people still treat me as a victim. I shudder and I want to cry each time I hear the ways in which people talk about victims. Or actually mention that word, victim, or talk about survivors. And it is that actually assures me that we are definitely we are definitely not a movement, because no movement that represents my pain would speak in the ways that we speak about survivors. The treatment we give survivors, no movement would do that. But I continue to hope, because I believe that there are well-meaning people that want to build a movement, that want this issue to be behind us. You've heard all the numbers, 50 million. When I think about 50 million, I think about 50 million independent stories. I'm not a huge fan of numbers, because numbers have a way of dehumanizing people sometimes. They are great, but they really have a way of dehumanizing people. Because when we say 50 million, you forget that 50 million is Sophie, it's Mercy, it's Grace. 50 million is 50 million different dreams. We forget that sometimes. We forget the 50 million when we put it in charts and we are negotiating and we are talking about people in numbers, and we forget that it's actually people. My job is to remind us that this has always been about people. Our movement has moved further and further away from being centered by people. In our search, especially for data, I'm happy that Kevin said that we don't need to not act because we don't have the data. I was here when I've been around for a long time. So I was here when all of us said we won't act until we did some prevalence studies. Then we did prevalence studies and we got the numbers. I was here when we said we needed more information on trauma-informed care. Then we got that information, right? I'm still here while people are insisting that for companies to change, we still need more data to negotiate with them. The goalpost is consistently moving, and no one tells us when accountability is actually going to happen. So, what is a movement? And why do I remain hopeful that this is something that we can do? The definition of a movement is people organizing themselves to build their collective power and leadership to develop a shared agenda for change, which they pursue through collective action and with some continuity over time. If you look at how we work, we do not have the DNA of a movement. As I said, we are not centered by people. We are centered by the issue itself. You ask all of us agree that modern slavery is terrible. All of us, if you pick any random person outside, they will tell you that if you tell them about modern slavery, they'll agree with you and say that it shouldn't be happening. No one will disagree with you on that. I argue that us agreeing on the fact that modern slavery is bad is not enough to build a movement, has never been enough to build a movement. Just because we agree it's bad doesn't mean that we agree on what the collective action is, which is important. Doesn't mean we have a shared agenda, which is important. Doesn't mean that we've agreed on standards. I've been a care practitioner for more than 20 years. And I sit and debate with organizations, NGOs, human rights organizations that actually abuse survivors in shelters, in different places, right? It's easy to point fingers out there, but even if we don't have a standard of care, even just within the way we work, how are we able to point fingers outside? So, I repeat, are we a movement, and do we have the capacity to become a movement? I'm going to pose 5 questions, which I think I read from a book she's called Charlene Carruthers, and she proposes 5 questions if you're thinking about movement building. The first question is, who am I? I feel like that's an important question because it's not a question we ask in these circles. There's an assumption because all of us fight modern slavery, all of us agree. We don't question people on values. We don't question people on direction. We don't question them on anything. It's just, welcome, come in, it's okay. I think there's a problem. If we're truly to have a movement that compels people to act, we need some shared values. Because shared values are important. Me defining myself is important. You defining yourself is important. Your organization defining itself. I read through. I love communication. I read through many organizations. If you take 5 human trafficking organizations and you read about them, all of them sound the same. Completely sound the same. It's a problem when I can't tell who you are and you want me to organize with you. You want me to my life is in your hands and I have no idea who you are. That's the first question. The second question is, who are my people? And this is an important question because I feel like, again, in this space we smile with each other, but at the end of the day, when the bottom line comes to taking positions, it's difficult to know who your people are. I come here, many people say Sophie is a survivor, and there's an assumption that I represent all survivors. I have a responsibility, if I represent all survivors, to be accountable to them. In this space, we have zero accountability. People come, they speak, they say whatever they want to say, and they're not accountable to a group of people. So who are your people? When you harm me, who can I come to complain to? When you don't live your values, who can I come to question? When you don't deliver on your promise, who can I come to claim those promises from? So who are your people? Because no one says who their people are, and that includes also survivor leaders like us. If we are serious about building a movement, we really need to question who is representing who in the room and why. Because then we can also discover who are the people. Kim has been talking about belonging. Who are the people that don't belong? Who are the people that are outside? Because you might just be gathering all your siblings in a room and nobody else is there. So who are your people? Is the other question. The third question is, what do we want? And I was having an interesting conversation with my friend outside. And I was saying that part of what is lacking in this space, and I've been saying, this space has a crisis in narrative. I think for the longest time, it was very easy for us to shock people with numbers, to shock people with stories of survivors in hopeless situations, and that trauma sort of got a few people interested. But now we're in a space where there's so much happening in the world. Trauma as a tool for creating awareness doesn't work anymore. We need a better narrative, and we haven't figured out what that narrative is. So the narrative of the hopeless survivor that is rescued by someone just doesn't cut it anymore. It doesn't. And to be honest, that narrative was bad from the beginning. I've worked with survivors for years. And do you know how many of them were rescued? Out of the survivors, I've worked with more than 1,000 survivors in my time, and only 3% of that group were ever rescued in the ways that we've built our narrative. Most of them were not rescued. Most of them left situations. Most of them negotiated. Most of them found community. We've built our whole framework around a savior who comes to save survivors. And therefore, all our programs are also designed around experts on who actually save survivors. And it's, again, I repeat, if a movement is to work, we really need to reflect, change our narrative, change how we do our programs, change how we do our policies. As I said, not all survivors require you to save them. Some of us are experts. If I came with my CV here without the title survivor, I would match most of your qualifications. And I'm not trying to brag here. Yes, I would. So me being a survivor is just a lens. It's a lens that I use to see the world and an experience in addition to what I've been through. What are we building? What are we building? If we are a movement, there must be something that we are building. I don't know what we are building. The same way we haven't defined values, we haven't defined who our people are, is the same way we haven't defined what we are building. We've defined very well what we don't want. But the most compelling argument is never about what you don't want. It's about the world that you want to see. That's the reason why I Have a Dream is one of the most powerful speeches out there. It's compelling because it provides an alternative for the future. What is our alternative? What is our I have a dream? What is the dream? Because I don't hear it. And I'm sure most people who want to be in this room are not hearing it. And the last question is, do we actually want to win? Do we actually want to win? Because some of the ways in which we've been working do not show a people that want to win. If we agree that we want a movement, we can't continue to compete. We cannot continue to compete. We cannot continue to compete for funding. It cannot be about organization. A few people, for a movement to erupt, we are going to have to leave our organizations behind for a minute and focus on coming together and working on the issue. Just for 1 minute. And that's going to take sacrifice in some cases for some of us. But movements are always about allyship. Movements are always about solidarity. So if you are here, if it doesn't cost you anything to be here, if this is just easy, then you need to question a little bit. A little bit of reflection needs to happen. If you think about all the issues that people have gone through, it hasn't always been easy. The people who are involved in all the successful movements, some of them were willing to lay down their lives. That's not what I'm asking for. But even if that was what I was asking for, we've seen that kind of allyship for other issues. For survivors of trafficking, can we be able to say that we have allies who would be able to do that for us? If you can't even allow us in rooms where decisions are being made. If when your organization is working on a program, the biggest goal is to please your donor. I'm being real. If we are to take movement building seriously, we really need to get out of this. I want to wrap up, and I'll wrap up as I started with a poem. Now this one is by me, and it's called Ally. Who is an ally? An ally will amplify our voice without trying to be our voice. Share our story without owning our story. Stand with us, protest with us, be present, create a platform without taking over our agenda. An ally will empathize without the assumption that they understand my experience. An ally will know that they will never be able to understand our experience, and it's okay. An ally will recognize their privilege, will know that pointing out their privileges is not a personal attack. An ally will know to create opportunities using their privileges. Today, my call is for us. I think all these things that all of you are doing is great. They're great, fantastic. But this issue is not going to be addressed without a movement, without us working together, without us coming together, without us putting our egos aside. So if you listen to anything, next time you're seated somewhere and you're working on this issue, I want you to remember that only a movement will address this issue, and a movement led by impacted people. Some of us are not going to leave. We'll keep reminding you, we'll keep being your voice of conscience until hopefully one day the right thing happens. Thank you very much.